Right now, as you watch this, more than 3,000,000 people have no home to go back to, not because of a war, not because of an earthquake, because of fire, walls of fire moving faster than people can run, entire towns reduced to ash in hours. And the most terrifying part of what is happening across Spain, France, and Italy right now is not the size of the fires. It is what officials said this week when reporters asked if these fires could be stopped. They said no, not yet. The fires are beyond control. Keep watching, because in the next few minutes you are going to understand exactly why this is happening, why it is getting worse, and what nobody is telling you about where this is all heading. Let us start with Spain, because what is happening around Madrid right now is the kind of thing that should not be possible in 2026. Spain has a national emergency, not a local emergency, not a regional warning. The central government in Madrid activated a national emergency declaration for the first time in years because the fires got so large and so fast that the regional authorities could not handle them anymore. Think about what that means. The capital city of one of the largest countries in Europe is surrounded by smoke right now. People in Madrid who walked outside this week could barely breathe. The worst of the Spanish fires is burning west of Madrid near a town called San Martín de Iglesias, sitting right on the border between the Madrid region and the province of Ávila. This is not one fire. Two massive blazes are burning so close together that along a 15 kilometers stretch they are essentially touching, two fires merging into one unstoppable wall of heat. Spain's military emergency unit, which is the country's elite disaster response force, took command of the entire firefighting effort, not civilian fire services, but the military. And the numbers they deployed are staggering. More than 2700 personnel over 400 ground vehicles, 21 aircraft and crews from Greece, Italy, and Portugal flew in to help because Spain's own resources were not enough. But here is what the Madrid emergency chief said, and this is the sentence that stopped everyone cold. He described the fire as being at its peak and said, "It is currently beyond the capacity of firefighters to contain." He said that out loud to the press in public. An official in charge of protecting the capital city of Spain admitted on the record that his firefighters cannot stop what is burning. That is not something officials say unless it is absolutely true and absolutely necessary to say. So far in the Madrid region alone, close to 1,000 hectares have burned. In neighboring Ávila, another 13 to 1, 5,000 hectares are gone. And there is a separate fire near Guadalajara that has already burned 3,200 hectares and forced dozens of villages to evacuate. In total, more than 30 separate forest fires are burning across Spain simultaneously. 30 fires at the same time. The Interior Ministry reports that evacuation orders now cover more than 1,000 residents in the Madrid and Ava areas, combined with tens of thousands more affected nationwide. At least one person has died. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez visited the emergency command post and warned that difficult hours lie ahead because while temperatures have dropped slightly, the winds remain completely unpredictable. Now stay with me here, because what is happening in France is somehow even more alarming. And the number I'm about to give you is going to make you stop and replay it to make sure you heard it correctly. In France, in the southwest, near the Atlantic coast, fires have forced the evacuation of roughly 2,000 people from the Giron department alone. Then add tens of thousands more from separate fires near other communities. The total displacement from the French fires is now part of what officials are calling one of the largest peacetime evacuations France has ever conducted. Peacetime. They had to specify peacetime because the last time this many French people were moved this fast from their homes was during a war. Let that land. Europe's fourth largest economy, one of the most visited tourist destinations on the planet, is conducting a wartime scale evacuation because of fire. The fires raging through the Giron department are tearing through the forests west of Bordeaux. The region around Le Capery, a famous resort area on the Atlantic coast, was ordered to evacuate. Emergency alerts went directly to people's phones, ordering residents in at least 5 communities to move immediately toward Bordeaux. Shelters in Bordeaux are now packed. A separate blaze near Biscarros and Parentis on Born has burned more than 2,500 hectares on its own and triggered over 2,300 additional evacuations. Entire towns near the fires have been emptied. When the residents of one village returned to check on their properties, they found charred ruins. Their homes were gone. The fire had moved through in the time it took them to drive to the shelter and come back. France appealed for international help, and the response showed how serious this actually is. Teams arrived from Romania, Croatia, Germany, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic. 8 countries sent emergency personnel to help France fight fires on its own soil. The French government deployed everything they had. Canada, water bombers, dash planes, military cargo aircraft pressing fire retardant on the blazes near Bordeaux, water-carrying helicopters, civilian and military resources combined into a single emergency operation. At least one person has died in the French fires. Authorities are warning that drought conditions, low humidity, and unpredictable winds mean the fires could surge again at any moment. And here is the part of this story that most news reports are skipping past. Bordeaux wine country is in that fire zone. One of the most famous wine regions on Earth is sitting in smoke right now. Wine experts told CNN this week that the vineyards have not been directly destroyed yet, but they are warning about a phenomenon called smoke taint, where grapes absorb wildfire smoke, and the wine made from those grapes is permanently damaged. The economic impact of what is burning through the Gironde is not just the homes and the forests. It is decades of agricultural heritage sitting in the path of a fire that officials cannot yet fully stop. Now let us go to Italy. And I want you to understand something before we do, because Italy's situation is different in an important way that changes how you should think about all three of these disasters together. Sicily has been under siege. More than 1,000 firefighting interventions have been recorded on the island since the middle of this month alone. 1,000 separate times that firefighters had to respond to fire emergencies on one island in 2 weeks. A firefighter died battling a blaze near Cutnetta. Homes across Sicily have been evacuated. Large active fires are burning near Bavona, where more than 6,500 hectares have gone up in flames, and near Resutano with more than 3,000 more hectares burned. Sardinia is dealing with its own separate emergencies, including a fire near Agliento that forced beaches to be cleared and coastal roads to close. In northern Italy, the crisis looks different, but it is equally serious. The Po River, which is the longest river in Italy and the water source for millions of people and thousands of farms in the Po Valley, has dropped to record low levels because of the persistent heat and drought. Municipalities in the Piedmont region have introduced steep fines for anyone caught using drinking water to wash cars or water gardens. They are rationing. In 2026, one of the wealthiest industrial regions of Europe is rationing water because there is simply not enough. Italy has already seen tens of thousands of hectares burned this year across the country, a figure well above the 20-year average, with fire risk remaining elevated across Sicily, Sardinia, Calabria, and parts of the Alpine Arc stretching into the north. Now, here is what ties all three countries together and what makes this particular week so critical. The driver behind every single one of these fires is the same: a relentless heat wave that has settled over southern and western Europe and refuses to move. Record-breaking temperatures, vegetation so dry it ignites from a single spark. Winds that shift direction without warning and turn a fire that was being managed into a runaway blaze within minutes. This is not three separate disasters happening at the same time by coincidence. When fire reaches the infrastructure that humanity uses to explore the solar system, you are looking at a situation that has moved past ordinary disaster response into something that does not have a name yet. Emergency services across all three countries are delivering the same message right now, with high temperatures, low humidity, and strong winds expected to persist. The fight against these fires is likely to continue for several more days before any of them can be considered even close to under control. Hundreds of thousands of people are sleeping in evacuation centers tonight. Firefighting crews from across Europe are working through the night in conditions where the air itself is dangerous, and the fire weather forecast for the coming days has not improved. Let us talk about something that the breaking news coverage consistently leaves out, which is why these fires are behaving so differently from the fires that Europeans dealt with 20 or 30 years ago. It is not just that temperatures are higher. It is that the combination of factors that produces a serious fire has become dramatically more likely to occur simultaneously. Europe has been getting drier for years. The drought cycles that used to last weeks and then break with clear throat rain are now lasting months. When soil and vegetation dry out to the extent that they have across southern Europe this summer, the fire risk does not increase gradually. It escalates in a way that is almost exponential. Vegetation that is mildly dry is harder to ignite than wet vegetation. Vegetation that is severely dry is like tinder. Even a small fire can spread rapidly because everything around it is already prepared to burn. The fires moving through the Spanish mountains and the French pine forests right now are burning through landscapes that have been building toward this moment for months. The wind component of this crisis is what makes containment so difficult, even with the massive resources being deployed. Firefighters can create fire breaks and use aircraft to dump water and retardant, and those methods work under most conditions. But when the wind shifts, a fire break that was protecting one side of a community can suddenly be behind the fire. The fire jumps, new fronts open, the resources have to be repositioned. In the time it takes to reposition, more area burns. The erratic winds that Spanish officials were warning about this week are not an unusual factor that made this fire worse than expected. They are a standard feature of summer fire weather in southern Europe, and they make it genuinely difficult to get ahead of a large fire once it has established itself in mountainous terrain. What does this mean for the people who live in these regions? The short answer is that the risk does not end when the current fires are finally controlled, which could take days or weeks. The drought conditions that produced the fires this week will not fully recover before next summer. Europe is entering a period where fire seasons are longer, more intense, and affect areas that were not previously considered high risk. The fires near Bordeaux are happening in the most famous wine region in the world. The fires near Madrid are happening within sight of a major capital city. This is not the remote wilderness burning. This is the inhabited landscape of Western Europe catching fire. The response from governments has been extraordinary in terms of scale. Spain mobilizing its military emergency unit, France conducting peacetime evacuations not seen since wartime, Italy managing simultaneous fire crisis across multiple regions, international mutual aid flowing between 8 European nations because no single country has the resources to handle what is happening alone. All of that is real, and it represents a genuine commitment of resources and personnel to a genuinely enormous problem. But every official statement from Madrid, Bordeaux, and Rome this week includes the same caveat. We cannot fully control this until the weather changes, and the weather is not expected to change soon. The 3,000,000 people displaced by these fires did not do anything wrong. They did not build in dangerous places or failed to take precautions. They lived in communities that have existed for centuries and landscapes that are now being fundamentally transformed by conditions that nobody in those communities had any control over. Towns that have never burned before are burning. Forests that were supposed to take centuries to grow back are gone in days. And the fire season is not over. European authorities have warned that extreme wildfire danger could continue through August. If you are in Spain, France, Italy, or any part of southern Europe right now, follow the instructions of local civil protection authorities without waiting to see what develops. Evacuation orders are issued when officials believe staying puts you at immediate risk. The fires in this crisis have moved faster than the evacuation orders in several cases. The people who left early when told to leave were the ones who had time. The people who waited to see how things developed were the ones who had to be rescued. Follow the instructions. If you are watching from elsewhere and you want to do something useful, donate to verified emergency response organizations working in the affected regions. The scale of this crisis means the recovery will take years and the need for support will outlast the news cycle by a long way. Europe is on fire. Not metaphorically, not exaggeratedly. 3,000,000 people without homes tonight because fire took them. Firefighters from 8 countries working through the night. Military aircraft dumping retardant on forests that were resort destinations 2 weeks ago. Officials standing in front of cameras admitting in plain language that they cannot yet stop what is burning. This is where things stand as of today. Stay with the story. It is not close to over. Let us go deeper on each country because the detail underneath the headline numbers is what makes this crisis genuinely different from anything Europe has dealt with before, and it is the detail that will keep you understanding what comes. Next, when you follow this story over the coming days, Spain's relationship with wildfire has changed dramatically in the last decade. The country has always dealt with fires in the summer months, particularly in the south and along the Mediterranean coast, but the pattern of where fires are occurring has shifted. The fires burning west of Madrid are not in the traditional high-risk zones of southern Spain. They are in the central mountain landscape that surrounds the capital in areas that people assumed were relatively protected by their elevation and their distance from the hotter, drier south. The fact that fire of this magnitude is burning within sight of one of Europe's major capital cities represents a geographic expansion of the risk that Spanish emergency planners are still adjusting to in Mahar. The decision to have the military emergency unit command the firefighting operation rather than civilian authorities is significant and reflects how serious the situation actually is. The military emergency unit known as the UME is not called in for ordinary fire events. It exists for catastrophic scenarios where civilian capacity is overwhelmed and coordinated. Large-scale operations are needed across multiple agencies simultaneously. Deploying the UME to a fire near Madrid is the Spanish government's way of saying, without saying it directly, that this is not a normal summer fire situation. The presence of the UME also brings specific capabilities that civilian fire services do not have, including military-grade coordination infrastructure, the ability to operate across jurisdictional boundaries without bureaucratic delay, and access to military aircraft and transport that civilian agencies cannot easily commandeer. The 3,200 hectare fire near Guadalajara that forced dozens of villages to evacuate deserves more attention than it has received in most coverage because it represents a separate crisis happening simultaneously with the Madrid region fires. Guadalajara province sits northeast of Madrid and includes significant pine forest landscape that has been under drought stress for months. 3,200 hectares is roughly the size of a large city. That area of forest burning in a single event represents not just an immediate human safety crisis, but a decadesal-long environmental recovery challenge. Pine forests in this region take 40 to 60 years to return to anything resembling their pre-fire state. The communities in Guadalajara that have evacuated will return to a landscape that looks completely different from the one they left, and it will remain different for their lifetimes. France's fire crisis in the Gironde department is occurring in the middle of one of the most economically and culturally significant landscapes in Europe. The land is forest. The largest forested area in Western Europe stretches across much of the Gironde. It is a largely artificial forest planted in the 19th century to stabilize sandy coastal dunes, and it is composed predominantly of maritime pine. Maritime pine forests are among the most fire-prone forest types in Europe. The trees contain resins and oils that make them highly flammable. They drop needle litter that accumulates as fuel on the forest floor. And they grow in dense stands that allow fire to travel rapidly from tree canopy to tree canopy. The land is forest burning is essentially a vast store of fuel igniting in conditions that provide everything a fire needs to grow without limit. The evacuation of Leger Caperet specifically captures something important about the social reality of this crisis. Leger Caperet is not primarily a year-round community. It is a resort area that fills with tourists and seasonal residents during the summer. The evacuation of this area in late July means that tens of thousands of people who were there on holiday, people who did not know the local evacuation routes, who did not have vehicles necessarily capable of carrying everything they needed, who were in unfamiliar territory when the alert arrived, had to be moved quickly through infrastructure that was not designed for emergency mass departure. The emergency phone alert sent to at least 5 communities ordering residents toward Bordeaux, where the French civil protection system doing its best under very difficult conditions. The shelters in Bordeaux that are now packed represent the physical reality of what it looks like when a peacetime evacuation of this scale actually has to work. The wine industry angle is worth developing more because it connects the fires to something that reaches far beyond the immediate human crisis. Bordeaux wine is not just a French cultural product. It is a globally traded commodity with enormous economic value. The Appalachians around Bordeaux produce wines that sell for hundreds and in some cases thousands of euros per bottle in the landscape that produces those wines. The specific combination of soil type, drainage, temperature variation, and microclimate is irreplaceable. You cannot move a Bordeaux vineyard. The vines themselves, some of which are very old, are rooted in particular plots of land that have been cultivated for the specific purpose of producing wine of a specific character for generations. If fire or smoke damage were to affect those vineyards, the economic loss would be staggering, and the recovery would be measured in decades, not months. The wine expert who spoke to CNN this week was trying to be reassuring when she said the vineyards had not yet been directly affected and that the grapes were not yet large enough to absorb smoke taint. But the word "yet" is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The fires are still burning, the smoke is still in the air, the grapes are still on the vines. The outcome for the 2026 Bordeaux vintage is not yet determined. And every day, the fires continue, and the smoke hangs over the region, increases the uncertainty. Italy's situation illustrates a different dimension of the same underlying crisis, which is the cumulative effect of multiple years of fire seasons hitting the same landscapes before they have recovered. Sicily has had serious fire seasons in each of the last several summers. The forests and scrubland that burned in 2022 have not fully recovered. When fire moves through landscape that is still in early stage recovery from a previous fire, it burns differently and leaves a different kind of damage. The soil is more exposed. The root systems that would normally hold hillside soils in place are weaker. After the fire erosion during the autumn and winter, rainfall becomes a more serious risk. Sicily's agricultural landscape, including almond orchards, citrus groves, and olive cultivation that are central to the island's economy, faces compounding damage from successive fire seasons without adequate recovery time between them. The water crisis in northern Italy's Po Valley is directly connected to the fire crisis in the south, even though it looks like a different kind of problem. Both are symptoms of the same underlying change in the European climate during summer months. Drought that was once an occasional severe event in Mediterranean regions has become a persistent summer condition, extending further north into the European interior than it did in previous decades. The Po River's record low water levels affect agriculture, industrial cooling, water supplies for power plants and factories, and drinking water availability across one of the most economically productive regions in Europe. The fines for using drinking water to wash cars or water gardens in Piedmont represent the kind of behavioral restrictions that European populations in the wealthiest parts of the continent were not accustomed to facing. They are a measure of how seriously constrained water resources have become. The 57% increase in burned area across Europe in 4 years reported by the World Health Organization this week is the statistic that provides the clearest context for everything else happening. If wildfire burned area in Europe is growing at 57% over 4 years, the trajectory by the end of this decade is not one that current emergency response infrastructure is scaled to handle. The mutual aid that is flowing between European countries right now with 8 nations sending personnel to help France while crews from Greece, Italy, and Portugal assist Spain, represents the current ceiling of what cooperative emergency response can deliver. That system is strained right now today with this fire season. A fire season 57% larger,